Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome back once again to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry, and I'm the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. We are in the midst of a study on Matthew chapter 24, and we are continuing to look at verse 14 and the Great Commission and the proclamation of that commission into all the world. Jesus said in verse 14 of Matthew chapter 24 that this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. This word world is the Greek word oikoumene and is translated as the inhabited earth or portions of the inhabited earth. Now, what some of our premillennial brethren will say is that this text is proof that the Great Commission hasn't been fulfilled. Because, hey, look, the gospel hasn't been proclaimed to every person in every nation that exists in the world today. But that's not what Jesus had in mind. Jesus was not telling his disciples to go and proclaim the gospel to every creature that exists in the world today. He was speaking of the world of his day. And that word oikoumene refers to the inhabited earth of Jesus' day. The disciples were commissioned to preach the gospel of the kingdom into all of the inhabited earth of that day before the end of the old covenant age could come. Okay? And that great commission has been fulfilled. And we want to demonstrate that further in this video. So to do that, I want to take you and I want to look at several texts in the New Testament that use this same Greek word oikoumene and demonstrate that we don't have to pigeonhole that word to mean the world today, as many try to do in Matthew 24:14. As we'll see, this word of oikoumene refers to the inhabited world and portions of the inhabited world that existed in the first century. Let's go to Acts chapter 11 and verses 27 and 28 first. Now at this time, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and began to indicate by the Spirit that there would certainly be a great famine over all the world. Oikoumene, same word as Matthew 24:14. And this took place in the reign of Claudius. Now listen, ask yourself a question. Did the famine that Luke said took place in the reign of Claudius, did that affect every nation that exists on the world today? Did every nation that exists on the world today exist back then? And were they affected by that famine? No, of course not. That famine affected at the most all of the Roman world, the Roman Empire, the oikoumene, the known world of that day. Okay? Let's go to another one. Acts chapter 17 and verses 5 and 6. But the Jews, becoming jealous and taking some wicked men from the marketplace, formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. And attacking the house of Jason, they were seeking to bring them out to the people. When they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some brethren before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have upset the world," oikoumene, same word as Matthew 24:14, "have come here also." So, the charge of these Jews against Jason and his Christian brethren is that they had upset the whole world with the gospel. Now, again, ask yourself the question. Had Jason and his brethren upset every nation that exists today on planet Earth at that time? Of course not. They had upset the Roman world, the oikoumene, the inhabited earth at that time. And listen, this context is critical. The Jews make a distinction between the world and Antioch in this context. Listen again. It says, these men dragging Jason and some of the brethren before the authorities, shouting, "These men have upset the world and have come here also." Now, here for them was Antioch. So they make a distinction between the world and Antioch. See, in this context, the Jews are using this word oikoumene to refer to the Jewish world. This gospel that was preached in Judea, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, etc., had been preached into the Jewish world first. And they had upset that entire world of Judaism. And now they're saying, hey, they're coming to Antioch and they're trying to upset Antioch too. You see, world doesn't have to mean every nation of the globe today. Okay, let's look at another one. Acts chapter 24 and verse 5. Let's read verses 4 and 5. But that I may not weary you any further, I beg you to grant us by your kindness a brief hearing. For we have found this man a real pest and fellow who stirs up dissension among all Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So charges were being brought against Paul before Felix. And the charge was that this Paul, he's a troublemaker. And he has stirred up dissension among all the Jews throughout the world. Oikoumene, same word as Matthew 24:14. Ask yourself again, had Paul stirred up dissension among the Jews that lived in Canada and US and Australia in those days? Did the nations of the world today exist back then? No. See, the word oikoumene doesn't mean a global situation. It doesn't have to mean every nation on the world as we know it today. Paul had stirred up dissension among the Jews that existed under every nation under heaven. Acts chapter 2. The same nations of the Jews that had gathered on the day of Pentecost and heard the gospel. Okay? So, once again, this word oikoumene, same word as Matthew 24:14, is not limited to refer to every nation that exists in the world today. Okay? And let's look at one more text. And I submit to you that this text, the interpretation of, or the translation of oikoumene in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, is how Matthew 24:14 should have been translated. Listen to this. Luke 2, verse 1. Now in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census should be taken in all the inhabited earth. Oikoumene. It's translated as all the inhabited earth. Same word as Matthew 24:14. See, the census that went out from Caesar Augustus was that the whole Roman world was to be taxed. They were to be accounted for. Okay? A census in that entire known world. It doesn't mean that a census went out to every nation in the world today. Okay? And notice, it's translated as all the inhabited earth, oikoumene. I submit to you that Matthew 24:14 should read like this. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the inhabited earth, as a witness to all the nations of that inhabited earth, and then the end will come. See, the gospel of the kingdom was a message of a first century kingdom establishment. Matthew 16, 27 and 28. And that message was specifically commissioned to be preached among the first century generation. And that message was that they should enter the kingdom, that they should leave that old covenant world behind and enter this new world, this kingdom that was being established in their lifetime. And that message had to go out into all of the known world at that time to give every nation, specifically the Jewish world, a calling into that kingdom, to give them a fair chance to enter their kingdom inheritance before the end of their old covenant world. So listen, oikoumene, the world in Matthew 24:14, doesn't mean the world as we know it today. Doesn't mean every nation that exists in 2018. That gospel of the kingdom was preached to every nation that existed under the inhabited world at that time. And that means that the Great Commission was fulfilled in the first century. Okay? So we'll have more to say on the Great Commission and the end of the age in upcoming videos. We'll see you next time on Answers on Eschatology. Bye for now.